Good morning, everyone. Today we celebrate the feast of the Holy Family of Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. And this great feast in our church calendar takes place in the octave of Easter. It is not only the feast that we celebrate the Holy Family, but it is the feast for all families, by which the church, through the liturgy, through the celebration of this day, special graces from the throne of God are poured out upon you, your family, your loved ones. And it's a beautiful part of our Catholic faith is that the reality of grace working in our family is active. And on days like today, the Feast of the Holy Family, these special graces are poured out. So I encourage you to dive deeply into our liturgy today, but not only here in our liturgy, also at home in your personal prayers throughout your day. It'll be a great day of grace and conversion and sanctification of our families. Pope John Paul II talks about this feast day of the Holy Family as shifting our focus from the manger in Bethlehem to the home in Nazareth. Recognizing that, as Father Wade preached on the fourth Sunday of Advent, that truth exists and the incarnation happened. This is what we celebrate at Christmas. The Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. But the Feast of the Holy Family illuminates how he lived among us. In what mode did Jesus live among us? Well, the answer is in the title. He lived among us in a family setting with Joseph and Mary. He lived in a family that had all of the natural elements that a family life has. Could you imagine getting settled in their home and helping the newborn child Jesus learn to walk? Could you imagine his first words that he uttered? I would guess that Jesus' first words might have been, Abba, Father. You know, it's a beautiful sentimentality, the reality that Jesus was like us in all things but sin. This reality of the humanity of Jesus, though a divine person, he grew up in this natural family. Again, many religions look at their founders and a God of their religion as being maybe a wise man sitting on top of the mountain, totally consumed with the things of God, withdrawn from all of the things of the world. Not our God. Our God was born in the most humble, poorest conditions and lived in an ordinary family, doing ordinary and everyday things. Jesus did chores. He made his bed. He took out the trash. I was preaching one time during Lent on the scandal of the cross and how the cross, Calvary, how this can be confusing. And I had a fourth grader come up to me after Mass and he was shaking his head. He says, Father, he goes, I don't understand what all the confusion is about. Why are you confused about Calvary? Why are you confused about the cross? I said, well, please help me understand. He said, Father, it's simple. If Jesus wanted to do it, we should want to do it too. See how simple our faith is? If Jesus wanted to do it, we should want to do it too. We should want to take out the trash. We should want to keep our house. We should want to contribute to our family, in our community, in our society. If Jesus did it, we should want to do it. We see that Jesus not only contributed to his household, he assisted St. Joseph in the trade of being a carpenter, working in his community. And I'm confident that not only did Jesus and Joseph provide for the material needs of their home, they probably assisted other families who might be in need. I wouldn't even be surprised if there were time that Joseph, Mary, and Jesus had to receive from others because they were in need. Again, charity is a two-way street. It's not always just giving. It's being open to receiving. We recognize that this natural family has natural elements of the natural family life. Again, and we see Jesus participating in the fullness of his faith, of the Jewish faith, of that Jewish covenant. We see it expressed in the presentation in the temple, but also in Jesus' bar mitzvah. Even though the bar mitzvah is not explicitly referenced in the scriptures, Archbishop Fulton Sheen and many spiritual writers talk about the finding of the child Jesus in the temple took place immediately after Jesus completed his bar mitzvah. The bar mitzvah for the Jewish nation is the kind of the rite of passage where the young boy is now recognized as a man in the society. And so we see this representation of Jesus not only doing the natural things in the home life, but also living the supernatural elements of the Jewish covenant. The family in Nazareth is not only a natural family, but a supernatural family. Natural in the sense of the ordinary activities, but the supernatural in the sense that its primary animating energy, its primary animating force within the family was quite literally the love of God. Everything they did was for the love of God and out of the love of God, and love of neighbor because of the love of God. If you look up St. Thomas Aquinas, you will find that that is the technical definition of charity: love of God and love of neighbor because of the love of God. So we see that this family of the Jewish nation was in truly preparation and recognition for the coming of the Messiah. And so we see the reality that the Holy Family not only reflects, magnifies, but emphasizes what the family is. We see in our office of readings this morning the Holy Family, the home in Nazareth, being referred to as a school, that we as our families can look at and imitate the virtues, the behaviors, the model, the mode of being and community that existed there. We see also in our society today that this model of family, this natural version of family, is under great attack. In our secular progressive society today, they try to advance their own agenda-driven model of what family life is. Let me say this again to make sure you're hearing me clearly, that the secular progressive society is trying to advance an agenda-driven model by redefining what marriage and family and human sexuality and even the human person is. We see that this agenda-driven is because all of their models and new paradigms break not only from whatever cultural norms that have existed, but it breaks from natural reason, natural law, and scientific evidence of who and what the human person is and how we are properly oriented. Again, part of the attack on the family is the attempt to suppress and even exterminate the notion of God and religion from the public sector and even in society. We saw this with our last presidential administration, where the freedom of religion that we are guaranteed as Americans was no longer referred to as freedom of religion, but simply freedom of worship. You are free to worship. Go to your house of worship and worship, but don't bring it outside those doors. That's not freedom of religion that is guaranteed by our Constitution and our founding fathers. Again, the attempt to remove the family unit as the original building block of society, the secular progressive movement tries to replace it with something else. When you remove the fundamental building block, you must replace it with something else, and that something else is big government and policies. Big government and policies wants to come in and say, you don't know how to grow and raise your family, we'll do it for you. We're going to tell you how to raise your family and what's appropriate and what's not. The government wants to come in and think on society's behalf, replacing the fundamental building block with what was evolved from family. And again, we have the going to extremes and perverting right reason, natural law, and truth by rejecting science, by promoting a reality that is based on feeling. If a person feels a particular way, all of society is now obliged to recognize this own person's individual truth, even though it might not even acquiesce or synthesize with anything in the world. Again, this notion that people can pick and choose gender or even opt out of their own gender, again, causes great confusion and great damage to society. This notion that a person wants to step out of the reality that they are either male or female and choose to be binary. Again, one cannot opt out of gender. It is part of science. What I'm talking about is not faith. I can take my collar off for this conversation. Right? We recognize this in the genetic code of the human person. There are 6,500 impressions within the genetic being of the human person that scream out what gender is for that individual. So gender is a reality that is imposed on us by biology, not by feelings. We recognize that these attempts to pervert the notion of the human person is convenient for the secular progressives. Because if we don't have a definition of human, then it can be whatever it wants. This is why slavery existed for so long, because those who were enslaved were not even considered human persons. They were considered property. And this is the exact same argument the pro-death movement in America throughout the world has, that is not life, that is an object, that is not a person. The church has defined a human person for us. We don't have to think too hard about it. St. Thomas Aquinas tells us that a human person is a body-soul composite. And when that body-soul composite comes into existence, that is a human person, a human life. Not only do we have the church's definition of it, the Human Genome Project that scientists endeavored proves this as a reality to be true. In the decoding of the human genome, it shows that all of humanity traced back to a single set of parents, one male and one female. Again, this is the reality of our faith, so I'm not spouting out what some people might refer to as hate speech. If someone were to talk about this as hate speech, we should correct them and say, this is not hate speech. This is speech you hate because it's truth. And for many, truth is offensive. But we recognize this call to defend the reality, not only divine revelation, but right reason and natural law. This is the call upon all Christians and all men and women of goodwill to support the truth and defend it with vigor. In our world today, in this combat, in this battle among what true matrimony is, what true marriage is, language is used such as traditional marriage. And I'd like to submit to your consideration that the term traditional marriage is insufficient. It's ineffective. And I think the term traditional marriage has lost its meaning. I think we would be better off by using St. Paul's words in the first chapter of the letter of the Romans to referring to not traditional marriage. We could say traditional marriage doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is natural relations or unnatural relations. This is the reality, is that we are either following what nature, what biology, what humanity has put forward, the natural order of things, versus an unnatural order of things. We see this in our society today. Many people will say, oh, I support traditional marriage. I remember a celebrity saying this recently. And that celebrity is known to be on their third or fourth marriage with having been unfaithful throughout many of his marriages. Please don't say you support, that is not traditional marriage. That is our modern secular sense of what marriage can and could be, but it's not what God intended. When we use the term traditional marriage, we stand here in 2019 and we look backwards in time and say, this is what we understand marriage to be. But rather, when we use the term natural marriage, we stand at the beginning with the first parents that the Human Genome Project points out. Faith refers to those two people as Adam and Eve. And we see that Adam and Eve come together and the human family is born. The Catechism of the Catholic Church reinforces this. In paragraph 2202, it says that a man and a woman united in marriage, together with their children, form a family. This institution is prior to any recognition by public authority, and that public authority has an obligation to recognize it. It should be considered a normal reference point by which different forms of family relationships are to be evaluated. So this is the model. It is not the church that gives the dignity to the human person or marriage, but rather the existence and dignity of the human person on their own, coming together in the natural order that communicate and pronounce what their dignity is. And then a couple come together, and then a society, then a village, then a city, then a country and a town, right? Again, all of our state and organized government comes from that building block which is the family. In our secular progressive society today, society wants to replace the building block and the dignity of humanity, what is enabled, what we hold to be true and self-evident, with socialism and communism. In the ordinary mode of existence in a republic, in natural reason, in right, in natural law, the dignity of the human person exists because they exist. And if you want to imply religion into this, because God created them. That's where their dignity comes from. But in a socialist and communist setting, the dignity of the individual comes from the state And if the state wishes to increase your dignity, they can elevate you. And if they wish to suppress you, they can annihilate you. And so we have this challenge in our world today. We see that the family existed before the state and the government, and the state and the government have an obligation to protect the family. 2203 of the Catechism says, in creating man and woman, God instituted the human family and endowed it with its fundamental constitution. Each member bears its equality and dignity for the common good of its members and of society. The family necessarily has manifold responsibilities, rights, and duties. This is the family that Jesus grew up in. This is what a family is supposed to be. But it is under attack for multiple reasons. And one of those reasons that our faith and community is under attack is because we haven't lived it. We as a faithful people haven't lived it. I know several of you here have broken families. I come from one myself. Marriage and family life is not easy. It's hard. And things don't go the way they should. But how do we work through this? How do we make the best of where we are? Sanctify what we can today. It doesn't matter if our family is perfectly intact, representative of the Holy Family, or something far more broken. If we turn to God as a community, as a family, God can heal and fix and take what is broken and make it whole. Again, how do we study this notion of family? Do we understand what the church teaches? We have an obligation to know our faith. You cannot love what you do not know. You cannot teach what you do not live. So for us to read the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraphs 2201 and following, to read John Paul II's Familiaris Consortio, to read the other documents that relate to marriage and family, Evangelical Vitae. All of these different church documents are given to us, written for you, to help you know and understand what God expects of us. Again, to have the natural gospel virtues in our family. For us to start living these, we immediately fight back against the culture of death and the culture of perversion by having recollection and prayer in our home. Mutual respect. Mutual respect. Did I mention mutual respect? Again, having good limits, boundaries, and expectations, helping to hold each other accountable and building one another up. Having personal discipline and a spirit of self-sacrifice. St. John Paul the Great says that two of the hallmarks of a family is hard work and solidarity. No one should have a sense of entitlement in a family, ever. We should be noted by our disinterested of self and only interested in the other. Again, invest in your marriage and family by going on retreats together, whether it's just a husband and wife taking time out to invest in your matrimony, or going as a family to take time away from the busyness of this world to live your faith as a family outside of the ordinary Sundays, to make a spiritual retreat. There's so many different opportunities that we have, but most importantly, to make time for prayer. It's been previously said that if the devil cannot make you bad, he will make you busy. Not all of you are aware of your sinfulness, but I guarantee all of you are aware how busy you are. Isn't that true? We're all so very busy. And this is what the devil wants to do to keep us from God, is to draw our hearts away from the things of God into the things of this world. So let us leave here today with this new fervor and commitment to study our faith, to understand marriage and family according to right reason, natural law, and divine revelation as handed down by the fullness of the magisterium of the Catholic Church. To make that personal commitment to be a giver, not a taker, and to pray together. Let's pray together as a family. Let's make that commitment to pray the family rosary. If we are not praying the family rosary, we could be losing the battle easily. But if we pray the family rosary, we can easily be victorious. So my dear brothers and sisters, on this great feast of the Holy Family, I invite you to receive our Lord today in Holy Communion. Thank Him for the gift of your family. Thank Him for the gift of our holy Catholic family, and then pray for the graces and gifts that you need. Ask deeply, my brothers and sisters, because the throne of God today wishes to overflow into your hearts, your minds, and your soul, and in society. with its many graces to redeem the world and to let them know that Jesus Christ is Lord.